Hello, everybody. We're back with another P Talk today with a really interesting topic regarding passion and leadership, but more on the dark side, which I think is so important, right? Because we don't really think about that, but it is such a big part of being a leader, and it is something I think if you're in leadership, everybody has experienced at some point. Or if you're really passionate, starting something of your own, you kind of feel like it's your baby, right? So, this is a huge part of, I think, what is really important to address and to look at here at Dr. Passion. I'm Mary Elizabeth Fremlin-Javanti, and we're back with another P-Talk with Dr. Passion, aka Soko Trin. Or is it the other way around? It's the other way around. It's Soko Trin, aka Dr. Passion. You're both.
I don't know. I go to conferences, people go, oh, you talk to that dude, that Dr. Passion. It just came up that way. So, I don't know. My students call me Dr. Trin. My coaches and clients call me Soko. But yeah, commonly people, for some reason, they know me as like
your
Mr.
nickname.
Dr.
Your
Passion.
nickname. The brand has become the nickname. Well, we have a couple of questions for you today, and some of these questions are going to have topics for those of you listening that are heavily research-based topics, and it's okay if at first they don't necessarily make sense or if some of them are not distinguishable for you. Hopefully this P-Talk will help you get a grip on some of them, but we are going to be doing a follow-up article on the topic and some of the concepts here. But also feel free to reach out, to send an email, to look us up on social media and reach out if you have any questions or something that we are talking about today interests you. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, the topic of the month today and for this month is we're talking about stress, but more particularly the dark side of leadership, because stress is such a big part of that. And so leaders are not always aware right away of their stress levels and whether they are in fact affecting processes or the culture on their teams. And so what are some commonly missed or disregarded signs of real stress? I think I want to start off with stress. And how do they sort of deteriorate teams and organizations from a research perspective over time, from what you can tell and what you know?
I think this is such a important question right now. We have experienced, from my own living, I've never experienced something like this. And by this, I mean a pandemic, a shift of working from face-to-face to online, mostly, or from home. And when I see what my clients, my students, my coaches have been experiencing and sharing with me, I see a pattern where people have been resisting against the change.
Right.
If there's one constant that we know, it's change, right? Change will always happen, and people resist change. And so one of the things I've noticed is a peak, an increase in stress, and also to a certain extent anxiety for certain people, but these are two different constructs. And stress manifests itself very differently depending on people. And yet I do see some common patterns again. So when we talk about leaders, the first thing that is fascinating when you look into research is, did you know that leaders, according to research, there's a beautiful piece of study from Gary Sherman, leaders, and the more senior you go in leadership, the lower your level of stress will be present. And we're looking at the level of stress hormone, so cortisol, and also the lower level of anxiety. So if you look at the spectrum where you got seniority of leadership, the top would be very senior, the bottom would be more junior leader. The higher you go in that spectrum, the lower your level of stress and anxiety. And that is fascinating. And yet, stress still manifests itself on the leaders and through some sort of mirroring effect, which I found in my own research. It impacts the employee, the team members. So the invisible signs, they are visible, but also invisible signs. Think of an iceberg, which is a very well-known metaphor, right? The top of the iceberg, what do you see? You would see people shouting. You would see people scratching their face. You would see people sleeping less. You would see people eating badly or faster. You would see the pace of their speech, maybe higher pitch, maybe faster, nervous type of way of speaking. But then there are invisible sides to this, the bottom of the iceberg, plenty of them. So a lot of ruminating thoughts. So rumination come back and come back again and again. Those leaders think about work nonstop. They bring work back to home. They've got their phones switched on. They feel the urge, the need to check the emails, and they sometimes don't even think about it, but they automatically have this ruminating thought about, oh, gosh, the project, the team issue, and so on and so forth. And these are invisible. You don't always see it when you're sitting in front of this
Right.
person. And so this has a huge impact on the rest of the organization that can cost million of pounds, dollars, or euros, whatever currency you're using. Through a mirroring effect, employee also perceive and got transferred part of that stress. Through a mirroring effect, employees start disconnecting themselves from the leaders. And think about it, when toxic behaviors manifest themselves on the leaders, they stonewall, they start blaming, passive aggressive, what else? Well, you name it. Those typical toxic behaviors and toxin. Then the employees start disconnecting emotionally from the leader. And this is where you start seeing things like drop or a huge reduction of number of top talents. So the churn rate, would increase. Top talent retention would be a challenge. People start delivering less. And also the employee and the teams will also experience themselves stress. So quite a few visible but also invisible way to see stress on leaders and on their teams.
It sounds like organizational doomsday, and I think as I'm listening to you, just also being a positive psychology person with a background in that, just thinking about what you're saying is making me think about how, yes, this sounds like a doomsday scenario, but at the core of this is the reality that some of these things are subtle sometimes, and they can evade leaders. So I think that's also a really big piece of this, is you're talking about this mirroring effect, but we're also talking about the subtle ways in which we sort of do that in teams over time. That kind of leads me to my second question, which is I wanted to talk a little bit about the tipping point where a leader goes from being aware, like I said, some of these things are subtle sometimes, from being aware that they're in a harmonious state of leadership or of passion, to the dark side, to the obsessive state of passion. What are some of the most maladaptive outcomes to pin down, and just tell us a little bit, because again, maladaptive outcomes is fairly research-based sort of concept. So talk to us a little bit about that.
This is a great question, and I think it's so current, as in it's right now in many places in the world. First, I have to take a step back and very briefly explain how passion works. That could be days in itself, but I'm going to do that in literally a minute or two. But passion is a construct in itself. You could measure, you can scientifically define this. And according to Professor Virant, who spent a huge part of his life investigating passion, there's two types of passion that are observed. One, which is, call that the nice one, the positive one, to oversimplify it, harmonious passion. So that's a sort of passion that has been generated when you had the autonomy to decide the life that you have, the way you think, and so on and so forth, leading to a lot of positive outcomes. So you're very passionate about, let's say, playing the piano. and then suddenly you start going on YouTube and you check out piano lessons in different languages, and you go to concert and suddenly you start learning Italian or Spanish or French. So this positive collateral impact when harmonious passion is present. People feel better as well, they're happier. But the other type of passion is obsessive passion. And that's what I call the dark side of passion, when dark side manifests itself. So in the spectrum, you go to the other side, and obsessive passion happens when people have that sense of loss in autonomy. They don't autonomously choose the life they have, the role as a CEO that they've had, and so on and so forth. And in that instance, when you have this, a lot of maladaptive outcomes happen, show themselves, manifest themselves. In my own research, when I interviewed leaders across the world, pretty much in 4 or 5 continents, but also looking at existing data and collecting additional set of data, I see 5 dimensions or 5 categories of dark side to that flame, that fire, that passion in leadership. When it's too much, passion doesn't brighten you. It actually burns you like a fire, metaphorically. First thing that you observe is behavioral maladaptive outcomes. Leaders will start being impatient. Like, that's a deadline. Do you have the report? Send it to me tomorrow. Being impatient. They also won't let go and start micromanaging. I told you to do this. I hear things like, I just can't let go. I have to check what my teams is doing, emails are sending. And that's a behavior you observe. And on
An
themselves,
obsessive, almost an obsessive
yes.
way.
And then and also a behavioral negative impact on themselves. They start self-neglecting themselves. The way they eat, the way they sleep, and so on and so forth. Then the other dimension is cognitive. They start having ruminating thoughts, obsession about work. It's almost as if they were bringing work back home in their heart and their mind and their soul. This they they think about work nonstop. They are ruminating thoughts about this. The other cognitive things that I see in leaders is blinding judgment. It's almost as if they were wearing blinkers to stop seeing certain things, what teams would say, and they would think a certain way, which is that's my way or the highway, and it does blind the judgment. The third dimension is emotional. When you have that dark side of passion showing up, that's when they step into the dark side, from the bright into the dark side. And emotional, they would start experiencing stress, which I would argue is so much more than emotional. We talk about that as well if needed. But they would start feeling very stressed about work. They wake up in the morning and they think about the deadlines, the project. They show anger. It's quite a common pattern that I see as well from leaders. And they even accept suffering, emotional suffering. It's okay. I'm working hard. The team is working hard. And they start normalizing it and emotionally start accepting suffering inflicted by passion. Then there's another dimension which is physiological, and in physiological, when they step into the dark side, they also experience stress. So stress is also a physiological concept. They sleep poorly, they eat poorly, they do sports less, they neglect themselves, and that affects the way they function, their body, the way they breathe, and the way they operate. They are less efficient at work. And then it's physical. And that you see that in, for example, artists, ballet dancer, when they're so obsessed about their dance, their craft, they start accepting suffering. I mean, there's a beautiful movie called Black Swans, where Natalie Portman is suffering, possessed somehow by her passion for ballet dancing.
Yeah.
And she start normalizing and accepting the suffering in her feet. And this is really fascinating because you hear that on leaders, organizational leaders themselves, and self-neglecting as well themselves, the physique somehow. And I hear things like, you know what, I eat poorly and so on and so forth. And I mean, I'm putting weight on, and so that's another physical dimension in the dark side of passion in leaders.
It just, like listening to you, I was just thinking just now, I was giggling a little bit because I was like, there you go, leaders, go watch Black Swan. And if for some reason your heart can relate and empathize with the Natalie Portman Black Swan character, maybe it's time to evaluate your stress levels.
Don't turn into the black swan. It's possessing you.
No, but I think it's great because I have watched that film, and also, we know all about, archetypes and how we can really, in these extreme forms, relate to certain characters and certain visuals, and they tell us something about us. So I think, yeah, there's a little bit of something to say about it, I think. It's not totally a giggle moment. But let's move a little bit into like the positive side of this, which is this doesn't have to be permanent. If a passionate leader or entrepreneur asked you, what can I do to manage my stress levels so I do not fall to the dark side? What tips or tricks or strategies would you recommend they personally take?
Gosh, that's such a great question. I got this question a lot of time when people say, "Oh gosh, I didn't know." You got this a concept called blind spot. Johari Window is a very well-known coaching tools, but you also use that in so many more disciplines than coaching. And when you have a blind spot, you don't know what you don't know. And so what I noticed that a lot of leaders don't see when they're stepping into the dark side, right? From the bright side into the dark side. And so practically a lot of things that I would invite them to work on is self-awareness. This is a given. There's plenty of research about correlation between self-awareness and being a good leader, for example, and the way you treat people. And very practically, there's 5 things probably that I would use a lot. One is it's actually an approach/tool itself that I've created, and I'm actually going to publish a research on this at some point. I call it SBA. Stop, breathe, act. 3 steps. You stop whatever you are doing or about to do. You were about to shout at your staff. You were about to send a killing email to someone that you hate. You stop. Or you're shouting, you're arguing with your wife or your husband or your team member. You stop. You could literally even walk to another room. You stop. Then what you do is you breathe for 60 seconds. And what happens is that physiologically, it allows the air to go straight and carries your blood straight to your brain. And you function properly. You start being able to
As
breathe
you're talking about it,
and
I'm feeling
function
myself
properly.
do it. It's
Right.
funny, as you're talking about it, I'm like noticing, I don't know, like if whoever's watching this will see that I physically started to stop and breathe. Oh, that's really interesting.
You stop, you breathe, and what is stopping and breathing for 60 seconds? It's nothing. 60 seconds. Then you act, meaning you go back to what you are doing or what you were about to do. So you were about to shout at someone, you were about to punch somebody's face, you were about to be aggressive to your team members. Then you had the time to stop, probably cognitively think about it, but then most importantly, you breathe, you created a headspace, and then you act. That's one thing. And next thing is mindfulness. Extremely well-known philosophy and approach that is used by many, including leaders. So practice mindfulness. It's one form of meditations
But
among
it's really
many,
misunderstood
many.
too, I think. I think mindfulness is really like when people think of mindfulness, they think of meditation. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping we will get to talk about mindfulness like as a theme in another month. I'm sure we will. Because I think it is a really misunderstood topic. I think lots of leaders, when they think of mindfulness, they're like, tell me what's new. There's a lot actually to the
Absolutely.
to the whole topic.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. And mindfulness now is more and more well accepted, welcome in organization. I mean, think about it. When I was talking to like C-suites in the past about mindfulness, to go, Soko or Dr. Tree, don't ask me to close my eyes, have a gong sound in the background and start breathing like in these Hollywood movies. That's not what mindfulness is only about. It's so many more things, right? You could mindfully walk, mindfully write, mindfully work as well. Well, that's the next level of mindfulness. So when you bring mindfulness to yourself, this is when power and potential really reach another level. So mindfulness as a regular practice is great. And one thing that I invite the people I coach to is 60-second mindful showering or a mindful activity for a minute on regular basis. You weave in mindfulness as part of something you anyway do every day. Brushing your teeth, taking a shower. So I practice mindfulness under my shower, setting an intention for the week, and then every day, because I shower every day, I set myself this mindful intention and I breathe for 60 seconds, focusing on the breathing. And then one sense, I pick either the listening, the smell, and so on and so forth. And what it does, it really also increases self-awareness. There's quite a lot of research between mindfulness and self-awareness. Journaling is another thing. And advise people to put what they have in their mind into paper, or
That's
if they
again
want.
another topic that I think when people think of journaling, they're like, again, tell me what's new. But there is so many aspects of journaling. And
Yes.
I was actually in a room, for those of you who don't know, I used to be a student of Soko's a couple years back, and I was actually in the room when you did an entire lecture on evaluation and reflection in careers. And I remember it. It's one of my favorite lectures, actually, that I remember from my time there. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to this topic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so journaling in itself is very powerful. It really allows you to brain drop somehow what you have in your heart, in your mind, into any format. And we could talk about journaling as well. The fourth thing is you don't know what you don't know. It's great to have feedback from outside. So if you have trusted allies feedback, that is powerful. So if you form we can talk about stakeholders mapping at some point, but imagine you have allies in your teams, in the organization, trusted people. Then you can ask them, I've been working on myself, been working on this. What do you think? Is there anything that you noticed about the way now I talk to people, the way I communicate? And then if trust is here, you vulnerably open up and you ask that trusted ally to tell you what he or she think about you and how you've been evolving. And last but not least, two things: positive relationships, very powerful. When stress is here or dark side is here, when you step into a dark side, you take your agenda 7 days in a week, you put one name per day, and you talk to these people that love you or that you love. And so what you do is you then spend time, like 10 minutes, 20 minutes over the phone or over a coffee with these people. And then you spend time with people that make you feel good, and so on and so forth. So positive relationship, one per day, like an apple, one a day, makes you healthy. And then finally, a healthy routine. So this is where I talk about and coach a lot of leaders on behavioral shifts. So setting habits, but especially healthy habits, a healthy routines, the way they sleep, they eat, the way they stop having bad habits. Professor Dr. Wendy Wood has conducted a huge amount of research on habits. And one thing that she talks about is the concept of nudge, for example, the concept of not only nudge, but also the concept of friction. So, for example, you want to lose weight, you have usually candies in front of you, then put the candies a bit further. You create a physical barrier between you and the candies, so it dissuades you from actually wanting to eat more candies. You could apply the same trick, to use that word, in leaders and in behavioral shifts. You could actually help them stop some bad habits by creating frictions.
Okay, so really quickly, I definitely want to ask you this question. For those of you who, when I ask this question, want to know more, look out for that follow-up article where we will really have some really detailed responses to these topics. How do you help leaders experience more harmonious leadership? Do you have a coaching approach for nurturing this?
This is a huge topic. I'm going to try to simplify the answer and make it very bottom line. There's different steps and the different dimension or aspect that you could start with. One of them is working on self-awareness. Self-awareness is a huge dimension that I found in my own research that has an impact in whether leaders step into the dark side or not. And one of the thing is when you're harmoniously passionate, that's great. But as we just discussed now, you can step into the dark side and be obsessively passionate. But what if your self-awareness level was super high, like a superpower? And if you have that superpower, what happens is that you don't allow yourself to step into the dark side. You then try to remain in the harmonious side of things, the bright side. And I found there was a tipping point with between a certain level of self-awareness and a certain level of autonomy that you could craft and create for you as a leader. So autonomously choosing the work that you want to do, the project you want to execute, the team members you want to be surrounded by, and so on and so forth. And autonomously choosing the leadership role that you want to have as well. When you have the autonomy or sense of autonomy, plus that self-awareness, it brings you to a nice tipping point beyond which you step into the dark side. But then you would, thanks to the level of autonomy and high self-awareness, remain in harmonious passion, if that makes sense. And then there's other things. So we work a lot on, as I said in the previous tips, stop, breathe, and act, and mindfulness, and journaling, talking to your trusted ally, practicing healthy habits or healthy routines. All of these little nudges and little elements cumulatedly make that you're very aware of yourself. You're very aware, and you do not let yourself slip into the dark side of passion. And so I coach a lot, and I work a lot, and I design a lot of development program for teams as well, so that they don't slip into the toxic side of team dynamic, for example.
Okay. Well, that's all we have time for today. But like I said, if any of you are interested in these topics, I mean, I love talking about all of these things, and some of these concepts, like I said, are multi-layered concepts, and there's, certainly here at Dr. Passion, different ways in which we approach them and create solutions for topics like this, specifically stress, which is, a common thing seen in leadership. So if you're looking out for more content, more information, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, thank you for listening.
I hope you enjoyed the chat. If you did, share, like, subscribe. And please, join me for the next one.